Yeah, I mean, anything that causes destabilization of the U.S. economy as it did, like, this is worse than any attack we've had. I mean, let's be honest, you know, you took a Pearl Harbor, you look at any attack, like, even one of the most horrendous things that has happened in this country with, like, 9/11, and, like, look how big impact this has had on a day-to-day life for people. Absolutely. And so I find this a enigma, a mystery.
It's an economic paralysis, right? You know, you have, like, what this has done is, like, you know, it's paralyzed, artificially paralyzed producers, artificially paralyzed consumers. So what that means is that you have, like, a dual shock, you know, on the demand side of things as well as the supply side of things. In other words, right, you know, you would want to sell something and I'd want to buy that something. I have a desire to buy, you have a desire to produce, for example, but the economic interaction, the transaction cannot occur because there's something external that's inhibiting that transaction. So, which in normal circumstances would have occurred, and that's the impact that, you know, it's like basically paralyzed the economy, and it puts a pause on your growth. Not only does it put a pause on growth and economic advancement, but it actually puts you in a position that was probably like maybe X number of years back in time.
Yeah, I have a question. So, what do you tell, or what is both of your perspectives on? So before we were talking about shifting of power and China wants to become power, U.S. power, all these big countries. There are people who are saying that China withheld the information or they released this, leaked, whatever, as a form of biowarfare because, I mean, if you could please talk about that a little bit, about just powers rising up and trying to take over each other, and at a certain point it's not, the power is so big, it's not, you can't really overthrow it unless it comes from within. You can talk about that a little bit too. Yeah. And just the fact that China kind of released this as a way of, like, there's no way to engage in an actual world war, but this may be a form of that.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to that point, you know, about, you know, what you were saying, the claim that this is, you know, could be potentially biowarfare. Whether it is or it isn't, right? You know, you should also look at how it has been dealt with. Are you dealing with it the same way you would deal with, like, an accidental nuclear fallout? Or are you dealing with this in a way that you see this as an opportunity to advance your national narrative, your economic narrative, your ideological narrative, you know? So it's you know, it's a combination of those two things. And, you know, this reminds me, the fact that, you know, you have a virus that's being studied, researched, has like it also demonstrates that it has like a dual purpose, right? It could be legitimate biochemical research, or it could be military use of like bioweapons, things like that. The dual nature comes down to intent, right? You know, I think I'm not sure which US president was asked, like, Mr. President, what is the difference between a satellite launch vehicle and an intercontinental ballistic missile, like, you know, if you take out the nuclear top? And he said, the nuclear warhead, and he literally said, there's no difference, it's just intent. You know, the same technology that carries our satellites out of, you know, the gravitational grasp of the Earth, right, also carries nuclear weapons. You know, it's the same technology. Like it has both like a civil and a military use, and that's exactly now what you're probably like hinting at, is that there could have been legitimate, like, you know, biochemical research, and then they figured out a military use, or it could have been unintentional lab leak. Either way, like, you know, how are you responding to that? Are you looking at this as an opportunity, say that, okay, the world is on pause and I should advance? Or you're looking at it as an opportunity to restabilize, or, like, you know, bring into, you know, find some kind of common interest to rekindle global commerce?
But that's not their point. I think there's a couple things. So I want to speak to everyone here. So there is this narrative back in March that and I know it sounds funny, but there's some dude who ate a bat.
That's what it was,
and there's one guy who ate a bat somewhere in a place, and because of that, now we have a lockdown in almost virtually every country in the world. For me, that narrative sounds a little bizarre, and it's just like also pretty unlikely. Those wet markets have been there for, I mean, a very long time. I mean, so like why this time? And look, we can find a way to rationalize many things. A couple of things that we do know is that China right now is surpassing growth. I'm looking at Reuters again, and I want to put up the facts because people are going to question me. Their factory output is growing at the strongest pace it has for extremely long time. They have industrial profit growth for the 4th straight month. So while America is still struggling and the West is still struggling, the Chinese are growing at a rapid rate, which they are. This is factual, and they have not actually done much to help the international community. We all know, whatever narrative you have, we know that this is a virus that came initially, everyone agrees with this, that this came out of China. Okay. But China has taken a very, very backseat, almost invisible role. Like they're not there. They're not participating in any discussions. And for me, that already signals to me that they're not interested in a cooperative worldview, or they don't want to lead by setting an example, or they don't want to lead by friendship. They've already shown that. Now, the CCP has a long history of violating, human rights, and so they've never been like the quote-unquote good guys, is how we would see it in the West. So, like, all these factors basically show that there is always been, for the longest time, there's been an effort to destabilize the West. The CCP wants to rule, and they want to be as the superpower of the world. That is a fact. And for me, it signals that they don't want to cooperate with us. They are just saying, fuck this. Like, we're just doing our own thing. We're going to keep growing. We don't give a shit. Shows to me that they are an adversary to the United States. And one thing that people will not say openly, they're like, well, they're competitors. They are right now the number one enemy of the United States from a foreign policy perspective. End of story. And that is how I don't think we have a bigger enemy in the world right now than China. So 100%.
That could, yeah. What is the purpose of it though? Why? Are they just trying to just get on top, just to rule the world?
I think it's to divide, and like that's to my point earlier. I've always maintained is like, and everyone should study this. Like, how do superpowers really fall? Like, how do they fall? How do mighty companies actually disintegrate? Who the fuck is going to stop these tech companies? Who's going to stop the biggest and most powerful nation to ever exist on the face of this planet? How are we going to go down? And we know it can happen because America hasn't been a superpower for very long. Let's be honest, right? It's been World War II, and then America took global, power. But like, let's look at the British Empire. The British Empire, the sun never set on the British Empire. That was there, and now they're not a stable power anymore. So my argument always has been, and we talk about politics a lot, is that the only way the United States is going to fall is going to come from internal division and is going to come from internal problems and where we're going to destroy ourselves. The only way to destroy someone who's strong is to have cancer. It will be a cancer grown from within, and it will destroy the country from within. And I think that is what we're seeing right now. And I think China, by introducing a virus that caused a lockdown, and like people are not going out of their home, people are going totally insane. They're not getting everyone. And we already know they're very polarized in this country politically. It's basically unleashed where we're all fighting against each other. Oh, okay, this is this fault, but not talking about China anymore. So they're super smart. They have unleashed a virus, and no one's talking about China. Because if you say China, there is you can't talk about them. That's racist. Yeah.
So I was just
go ahead.
So just to also I was thinking about the question that Leo asked is like why is this there's this pressure or need to try to dominate global politics? Why does the Communist Party, for example, have this ambition at all? Right, in one sense, if I understand that.
100%.
Well, the way I look at it is that it's like not an ambition that's unique to China or unique to the Communist Party.
Isn't it a human condition though to be number one?
I think it's the nature of international relations. I feel like there's a reason. Like even in this, so the U.S. established formal diplomatic relations with China in the 70s. Communist China was not recognized by the U.S. until the 70s, right? And one of the first things that, or one of the first few things that they did was they allowed Boeing to provide, civil aircrafts for the party leadership, premier, president, prime minister, chairman, etc. Individuals who require some kind of official aviation, right? And they said, okay, you'd probably use Boeing as a supplier for these use. And so when the Chinese accepted the aircrafts and like they found like okay, it's like maybe like a Boeing 777 or whatever, whatever Boeing model, they found that it was bugged completely. The aircraft that the Americans sent was bugged. They had listening devices, recording devices, basically surveillance, right? And that's, I think, that incident or that occurrence in and of itself shows the deep mistrust that exists between the West and China. The Opium Wars, if you look back into history, right, the British actually were responsible for a lot of Chinese people being addicted to opium for their commercial interests. It's very well known. It's called the triangular trade. And they wanted to recover silver that was being drained. So they basically got a lot of Chinese people addicted to opium. And the Opium Wars. And it's in the Chinese psyche, there is some justifiable level of mistrust for the West, and that's true, and that exists before the coronavirus. That it predates even sometimes the world wars, right? Yeah. So in that sense, that there's this, and of course, if you look at modern China and the Communist Party's policies, they coined the term cyber sovereignty. Cyber sovereignty is something that China believes in, that our cyberspace is going to be ruled and controlled by the national laws where the cyberspace exists. And this, of course, there creates data privacy issues, surveillance related issues, liberties are obviously compromised. You can enable a police state, right, and everything.
But it has to be. But this has been so. I think it's pretty simple. The answer, man. Everyone wants to be number one. If you have ambition, I will say it's if I want to start a company, I want to be the number one.
But at what expense, though? I mean,
some people, everyone has a different concept, and that's where I go to you because I say that because I think that, in my opinion, and this is a very maybe naive viewpoint, but I think that you can become a leader by doing it in a different way than China is doing it. But that's me from a total Western standpoint saying that, right? So I think that look at China sends spies to this country. How many spies are? How many? There's been a massive effort. Yeah. I mean, you could look. I mean, just and I was doing it because I have a lot of. Have done a lot of background research on this, but I would just looking up on Google how a normal person just put in Chinese spies. I mean, you will find a list. People like to list Wikipedia. I mean, there is so many cases going from 2018 to 2020s every few days. I mean, actually, you want to give the statistics from the DOJ?
Yeah, the DOJ apparently files over 100 cases a week or something like that in connections to allegations related to criminal conspiracies arising from China, where it's for example, either stealing intellectual property or violating sanctions, for example, sanctions on Iran, sanctions on North Korea, or even monitoring the Tibetan community in the U.S., monitoring activists, pro-Hong Kong independence activists. Of course, also trying to compromise U.S. intelligence networks and
everyday people. Finding people in Chicago, Boston. I mean, this is there's a whole litany of things. So when you think about this whole thing, do you think it's wrong for any leadership to say, "Hey, we need to watch out for China"?
No, So see, the thing is that you want to be tactical about what you signal to the other side, right?
Right.
First thing that I thought was was a strong response was that the U.S. asked for the Chinese consulate in Houston to be shut down, and I think they arrested a spy in San Diego a few days afterwards. And now I think recently they arrested some guy who was working for the NYPD.
That happened just a day ago.
Yeah, and so they've sort of ramped up their procedural efforts. Okay, so from a political standpoint, what I think is what you're getting at, right, is that of course, the U.S. has taken a stern position and a strong position
with a lot of counter though from the mainstream media.
Yeah, with a lot of I guess lack of support from the mainstream media, and I think that's just again one of those things about American media is that I guess domestic issues somehow take precedence.
But no, it's not even that. It's not about taking precedence. It's not saying this is fourth importance. This is saying no, you're not right. We haven't currently.
I just don't understand.
But there is a concept dude, what are you talking about? You can't say that. We had and there's going to be questions, right? We're going to have without getting political, there's going to be debates, and those questions going to come up. And then there's one person who says they're a real enemy, and the other one saying no, they're just a competitor. So I think that there is a push right now from Hollywood, mainstream media, the NBA, whatever. They're just very cozy.
Complicit.
Why are they so cozy to China? Why?
Obviously there is a lot of business to be done in China.
Yes.
It's not. It's like an emerging market for so many things, right? Now you have like a ballooning middle class in China that can afford the kind of things that a middle class
watch your sports and watch your movies.
Like increase.
Hollywood changes their script because they have a large Chinese audience. So in Hollywood, what they do is they change scripts now to make sure it matches what the Chinese would watch. All the big blockbuster movies. This is a known fact.
Yeah, and
because they know it's their market. I mean, if you have a business and your product is going to be disseminated in the market, you want to make sure you do market research, right?
Yeah.
And so we are now in a struggle where we are forced to be in alliance with a country that is a big part of global trade. I mean, biggest manufacturer in the world. But we also know we need to hold them accountable. But like when money's at stake, how do you hold an aggressor accountable?
So exactly,
this is a problem.
This is where I feel like that an interesting phenomena is occurring, that it's China that's actually saying that, hey, let's have open trade, let's have let's bring down trade barriers, let's do free market capitalism. And the reason why they can afford to say that is because they have a synergy that exists between the Communist Party and the industry giants that exist in China. That synergy enables them to say that, hey, let's have open trade, because their political and their economic interests align at that point. Whereas in the US, the US government might, for example, take a strong position on Hong Kong and say that, listen, it's not right for you to be annexing Hong Kong without a vote by the Hong Kong people, for example, or respecting the treaty that you signed with the British when Hong Kong was handed over. That's the US government's position, and they've made it clear that they don't consider Hong Kong independent of communist China anymore.
Yeah.
As an investment
that's
destination. It's a huge status change, right? Investment issue. As an investment destination, when capital is transferred from one country to another country, you want to be sure that your investment is not in a politically risky climate. And Hong Kong for a very long time until recently had that status where the West felt comfortable to do business. And you, on the other hand, in the US, for example, you have the NBA, a private entity that actually takes like a pro China stance in one sense, right? So that disconnect between American industry and American innovation and the U.S. government's political stance.
That to me is the real problem.
It's the reason why you're able to see corporate entities from China do the kind of things that they're able to do with stolen intellectual property.
Yeah, so a lot of people in America are openly complicit with this, and they are also not allowing any dissent against the CCP. And to me, that only causes more problems. And that is just a factual truth. So for me, I always see this duality nature where it's like we want to stand for social justice issues, which I think a private company, they can do that. But then the question is, why have this two-faced? Why being for one social cause and then the other you just shut your eye to it? And I think this is a reason for real concern. And I've always said that this pure hatred for I think we should always question the government. I'm for it, right? I believe in the questioning the government and having open debate about it. But there's a point where it's just you're trying to sabotage the efforts that are potentially right. Because if you dislike someone, they might have things that are actually good. And that's not happening right now. It's like we just dislike our leadership so much that even if the things that they're doing correctly, we just don't give a fuck. We want to burn everything down. And there's a destructionist mentality which is only going to hurt us in the end. And I feel like this coziness and warmness towards China is going to hurt us, if it already hasn't, massively.
Yeah, so. And democratic discussion should never descend into democratic disruption,
Well, and that's what we're seeing, right?
And I think it's interesting to see how, countries where, this kind of discourse does not exist, how do they view countries where such discourse exists? And I'm basically talking about Russia and China, and they have a term for this, and they call it weaponizing dissent.
Right.
They think that the best way to internally defeat a democratic adversary is by weaponizing the opposition.
This is what I was saying.
So then you basically muddy the waters, right? The legitimacy of the opposition is somewhat compromised because it sort of gets intermingled with the interest of the foreign power, right? And what that does is that when the government in power looks at the opposition with suspicion, saying that, hey, you're in bed with a foreign adversary. So it destroys the legitimate discussion that should occur in a democratic nation, and it's somewhat enabled by media and technology and platforms and targeted advertising, things like that. That creates so much confusion and commotion that I would agree that it sort of detracts from what is actually right. Yeah, what is actually right and what is is a politically prudent decision, or and even from a national security, it's like a prudent decision, and things like that are completely
yes. And this is my point, what we talked about last week. My point always is try to find as many facts as possible before you make decisions, because I think, look, there's an argument, oh man, you can go on social media, you can buy advertising, there's Cambridge Analytica, there's all these platforms that are disseminating messages through social and other platforms like the news. But at the same time, we also live in a country where we have, at least for now, and it might be changing, we have the ability to go and research for ourselves. I fear that that's going to change at some point. We're already seeing massive censorship. Leo and I have our clips censored.
I didn't know.
Yes.
Well, because I think we included the word coronavirus and conspiracy, whatever, and then they, there's a little bar.
Yeah, it's not even that, but we've had our account limited for a time. We put in Instagram jail. So this is a whole other topic about censorship, but I fear that from happening. But as long as we have freedom in this country, we could go on a computer. We're very lucky because I've traveled across the world, and you'll go to the countries where your phone doesn't work, and you forget, dude, I can just go on Google. What? You can't do that. Mm-hmm. So as long as that information is there, you should seek out as much information as possible, because it will give you a more informed view, and you have to do more effort. Yeah, I think that's really important.
That's and I'm thinking about the everyday person out there and doing their due diligence and putting in their own effort to research these things, because there is just so much information overload that at some point it's what are you guys talking about, and then it just really sways everything from what is really important when what's really happening. And I can't imagine how many millions of people are just so stuck on internal country issues, just election coming up, BLM movements, conspiracies behind that. All this stuff that's we don't even talk about this. We even talk about foreign anything.
Oh, that's important. And I think what Amog is saying, and what I've been hinting at too, that a lot of our internal problems might actually have roots in external problems on the foreign policy level. And that's where I always want to look at an issue from a holistic standpoint. And I think where mainstream media and most people are concerned with is I've always said, don't put out a fire. I have an organization right now. And at our max, with all my companies, we're employing 85 people. It's a very small company, but that's my business. So we have problems. And I'm always, as a leader, I get in a boardroom and I've told people, guys, we've had this problem. Please tell me how you're going to solve it, but then also try to have a mitigation plan in the future and get me to source of the problem. I want to know everything around it. And this discussion doesn't happen. It happens in smaller boardrooms or foreign policy discussion, closed doors. And which is maybe a good or bad thing. I don't know. That's a whole different discussion. But I think where the American media, because we're a democracy and we are going to elect our leaders in a few days, it does matter to know, hey, it doesn't matter who's nice, who's not. What is actually the real issues, and where are these decisions going to be? Because at the end of the day, a democracy does make a decision. And we as a people, as long as we're a democracy in this country, we are the ones who are going to decide foreign policy in some indirect way by voting who we do.
Yeah, but based off of the information that the people are getting, and that information may not also be accurate.
No, you just need to be as self-educated as possible and look. Don't just take everything at face value. That's all I'm saying.
And what percentage of the people are actually woke? Or
I have no idea. And so that's I don't know. That's debatable. So.
And this also coming back to our discussion on China and their perspective on the role of a nation, or the idea of a nation, and how a national imagination should think of itself, right? So I actually remember reading about this one incident where one of the Chinese premiers was asked in the 1980s, was asked, what do you think is the significance? I think it was a journalist or an American diplomat or someone like that was asked the Chinese premier, what do you think is the significance of the French Revolution, which happened, of course, in the late 1700s? And his answer was, it's too early it's too early to say. That's the do you see the distinction, like the difference? Like our political interests and incentives are very narrow-minded. We're always thinking about the next election or the next, opportunity to make a decision, and not think deeply about what that decision means.
No.
And that's what the national imagination in China is, that it's a civilizational state, 5,000 years of continuous recorded history, which the People's Republic of China, Communist China, CCP, has decided to call its own legacy.
Yes.
They have not decoupled from that. They have not said that, okay, those are like ancient times and those are backward thinking, like the way they've dealt with the Tibetans, for example. They have worn that on their sleeve. They said that is our civilizational state history, even though communism as an idea in China is obviously modern, right?
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, I'm just thinking about people who are actually do their own due diligence, and I'm just thinking about the unemployment now, and people really just trying to find new jobs and trying to make income. I'm just thinking my situation too. I'm more focused on making a living, creating income, and just getting ahead in my career, that I don't focus on these things. So imagine other people who are also struggling, trying to get their life together. This is probably something that's not on their
and all I'm saying is it should be, because it is directly affecting you.
They don't know that.
Yeah, so and I think that's a good thing. And I think at the end of the day, it's like it's a battle of ideas, really. That's what civilizations are about. Everyone has their own idea. I've had conversations with people who are from China, and they've said, we've had discussions around, hey, like, what about like so you can be free, have freedom of expression. There was a notable person who was up for a very massive international award, and right before the international committee was going to bestow them the award, the Chinese government had put them in prison. And there's a lot of back and forth and discussion about this, and then the international committee told China, like, whoa, what about, you can't like put people in prison for their ideas. And they're like, wait, who said that? He's like, well, you can't do that. He's like, who said who? It's like, that's your values. In the West, you value life, liberty, property. We don't value that here. That's not our values. Keep your values in America and the West. Like, we don't value those things. So it's really a matter of like values. And we have to think about like the Judeo-Christian Western values have been the one that we think are quote unquote the right ones. And I agree with them wholeheartedly. But in other places, in other cultures, they just don't agree with those things. You can speak to a lot of people that I've gone to school with, and they'll openly say, who are from China, like, they're very happy with that system. They don't want everyone to be able to have a say. They don't want to have like a democracy. They're like, you guys are crazy. You guys are like all criticizing your own president. No, we don't want that. Like, it's going to be so unstable. They just don't. So everyone has a different view of things. Yeah. So for me, it's all a battle of ideas and values. And I have a fundamental belief about certain values that I own. I have ownership of, that I believe in. And I want those values to win. It's a battle of ideas. And I think that's really what it comes down to. And one of the things I see in this country happening is that we're shifting away from some of our values. We are having more censorship on the internet. We're having more, you can't say certain things, or like it's a problem. You can't have open discussion. I was talking earlier, like if I'm at a workplace and if I say something, if I am on this show and I say something, I might get in trouble. And it's like, am I living in the United States? If I show support for a president, for example, currently, I will be totally ostracized in this country. Absolutely. Like, if I'm in Boston right now, I can't go to work tomorrow if I say that I openly support the president. Like, so we can't have, we're moving in a different direction. That's my concern. So I hope that we always exercise our right for freedom of information, doing our own research, having conversations like this. Do this more often. If you have the weekends off, like if you have friends that you want to talk with, talk to them. I think we need conversation today. We need this. Yeah, I want to do this on a Sunday morning. We're here like 8:45 or whatever. Why? Because we know that this is so important, and this is something we have fought for. America fought for her freedom. Yep. The West fought for their freedom. A lot of democracies, India fought for their freedom. And so we need this. So when I'm shutting myself in a room and just like feeding everything what someone's telling me, I'm not exercising what many people, our forefathers, have fought for. And I think that's unfortunate.
You know what's creepy, or scary at least, was we were talking a bit earlier, that in China, if you go on like Google or whatever, it just blocks it. Yeah. Or even if they have, in the West, we have WhatsApp or whatever, or Facebook, they have their own version of WhatsApp.
Yeah, they have
their own
everything.
Parallel, it's like a parallel universe, right, in and of itself, because, instead of like Facebook and Instagram, you've got Weibo and WeChat.
Yep.
No, I mean even and of course, like they have their own Alibaba, Baidu.
Oh yeah. It's strange. It's strange.
And I think these are like institutions, right? In the West, you'd think of like Amazon, Facebook, Google, Apple as being institutions, and I think they've recognized that that in order to replace the incumbent superpower, right? You need similar, if not like same level of credibility and sophistication to your tech institutions.